Alright, Super Meteor fans, we got to talk about a problem that has been identified over in India. Problem is, right here on our panniers on a lot of these bikes, this bar is making contact with the top of the suspension. So, when you install these, this doesn't allow your suspension to move. As I'm about to demonstrate, there is a somewhat of, there is definitely flex in there. So if you don't grind out material here, then potentially what can happen is, because this is not being allowed to move back and forth like this as the bike is going up and down, that can end up breaking this rod in here. There is video, and I will include it in the description, of a gentleman in India who actually broke this rod. Hey, we are recording. Okay, I am now going to push up and down on this bike as we are videotaping it, so you can see that as I'm pushing up and down, the suspension at the top is actually moving. So if we don't grind the material out, then that's going to make contact, thus breaking that suspension rod. Because this suspension rod right here, as this is flexing back and forth, if this is bound up straight, the rod's not going to go in and out the way it should, and is going to bind up inside of here, which in turn is going to break the rod. There's not a lot of movement in there. As you can see, there's not a lot, but there's enough to where it can be broken. Okay, if we come over here, you can see how I've got a lot more material taken away, thus making it so that way this will not come in contact with it. So we got two possible ways to do this. Okay, so we have two ways of doing this in order to fix this. Okay, so that way we will prevent the panniers from breaking the suspension on a motorcycle. Okay, and still be able to utilize this sort of suspension or pannier, thus allowing setup like I've got it here. Okay, so way number one. Okay, after you have this mounted on the bike, okay, you then pull this bolt back out. First, you're going to need to remove, drop your preload back down to factory settings. Okay, so you just pull this bolt right here out. Okay, pull this out far enough, and then you can start using a die grinder. Okay, which is this thing right here, an orange. Now, downside to this is, if you don't already have the tool like I do, the die grinder, this thing right here, for residents inside the United States, is going to cost you about 50 bucks. You can obtain die grinders cheaper than that, but for an electric one, bare bones, absolute minimum, that tool is going to cost you 50 bucks. Okay, so way number two. Okay, you completely pull the panniers off the bike, and then you can utilize an angle grinder. So currently this one's set up with a cutoff wheel, but you could put on a regular grinding disc, and you want to remove just enough material to where the pannier is not going to make contact with the top of the suspension. So that, as shown in the previous piece of footage there, you're probably going to need to remove, based on what I'm seeing on this one, about quarter of an inch worth of material almost all the way back. So we got about, roughly from there, you're going to leave about a quarter inch material, and then you're going to put this nice little groove in here. That way it's not making contact. So part of the reason why I put this green paint in here was so that way I could see whether or not this was making contact, whether this was enough or too much. If we come over here to this side, you can see that right here, because I haven't removed enough material yet, it is taking chunks out of that paint. So I'm going to go through and I am going to unbolt this again, and I'm going to carve this back quite a bit more on so that way it's not going to make contact. Once again, the purpose for this is so that way the top of this has freedom of movement. So, because the gentleman in India, when he broke his suspension, this was intact, the bolt was intact. That tells us that because when your bike comes stock, this bolt is pretty tight. So we can therefore eliminate the idea that this is actually breaking. It's not breaking the bolt. Like I said, what it's doing is without grinding out this extra material, once again, this isn't being allowed to move. It's not moving a lot. We're probably only moving, you know, an eighth to 3/16 to, you know, a quarter at best of flex in here as the suspension's moving around. So once that's because these things are in direct contact with this and it's stopping the movement, that's what's going to cause this piston rod in here to bind up in there and eventually fail.